As I've been here now over 20 years, what I've seen in the last decade is that God is calling more men and women of deep, abiding faith to our nation's capital to serve in government. We have more Bible-believing, God-fearing Christians that are serving in office today than any time in modern history. Now, they're not in the majority yet, but they're close. And that tells me God's not finished with our nation, because usually when he's ready to finish with something, he's pulling people out. He's not sending them in. And God is continuing to send people into positions. And all of us have a role to play. One body, many members. And we all have a part to play. And this next panel that we're going to discuss, the power of the anti-woke right, how Americans put radical companies on the run. You know you're making a difference? Well, over the years, you've heard us talk about the rise of corporate wokeness infiltrating the largest American companies. I guess every one of us in this room at some point in time struggled as to whether or not we should buy something, give something up, quit drinking this type of coffee or retail outlet. I shrunk to 99 pounds. I couldn't buy anything because everything was from the woke left. But the tide is turning. The tide is turning. And it is because Americans are getting involved. And we will not be silent anymore. And so to lead us in this discussion about the good things that are happening, there's a lot of work to still be done, but to lead our discussion, I'm delighted to bring to the stage someone who's been part of my brain trust for the last 20 years. Her extensive coverage of corporate activism over the years has no doubt given Americans the courage to put these leftist companies on the run. Please welcome the editorial director and senior writer for the Washington Stand, Suzanne Bowie.
If I get down, you pick me up from the ground. You give me love and don't give out, giving no conditions. You lift me up and I forget now.
Well, one thing Tony didn't mention in his introduction about me is something that was completely uninteresting until about a month ago, which is that I'm from Springfield, Ohio. The dystopian pet-eating capital of the world. So I am one of the 60,000, yes. And what's funny is that over the years, my husband used to joke with people and he'd say, I'd like cats. It just depends on the chef. And now he's in the witness protection program. Anyway, back to consumer activism, which became my life's passion when I realized that stalking NHL players wasn't a viable career path. So about 20 years ago, at the height of the same-sex marriage debate in the States, I decided that it was silly to go to work at FRC every day, spending my days fighting for values, and then turn around and spend my money in the places that attack everything I stand for. Back then, people weren't really walking into Harris Teeter with a list of all of Nabisco's sub-brands like I was, so I like to think that they thought I affectionately was a little crazy at FRC, but I got a reputation, but friends don't let friends drink Starbucks. I still maintain that one of the best presents I've ever gotten is a set of gift cards to companies with the lowest corporate equality ratings. Thank you, Lindsay. But now the entire landscape has changed. In just 18 months, CEOs have become terrified of the people in this room. For once, Americans are making companies think twice about their extreme politics. And I know my husband is personally praying that Robbie Starbucks' next expose is on Bath & Body Works so that I stop spending hundreds of dollars at the semi-annual candle sale. But the bottom line is, if you're one of those Americans that's taken the stand for your values with your dollar, you're winning now. You're winning. And these men on this stage have been fighting this battle alone for so many years, and they're here to celebrate that. But they're also here to explain what you can do to keep the momentum that we've seen from Tractor Supply and John Deere and Harley Davidson going. So I did ask these guys for some fun facts for their intros, and they did not disappoint. Justin Danhoff, whose name is synonymous with corporate activism. If you ever heard about like consumer activism, corporate activism, shareholder activism, Justin was probably the name that you heard for a lot of years. He's now the executive vice president of corporate governance at Strive Asset Management, which was the brainchild of some guy named Vivek Ramaswamy. Yes, Before Strive, Justin was a fixture at the National Center for Public Policy Research, making a name for himself in activism. He's been to hundreds of shareholder meetings, introduced a pile of resolutions to support corporate neutrality in politics, and he's also been featured in Sports Illustrated with an absolutely adorable 8th grade haircut for being one of the best wrestlers in the country in the 8th grade. Now he's taking down CEOs. Stephen Sokup spent years being disillusioned by the financial industry, which prompted him to write The Dictatorship of Woke Capital, a book the Wall Street Journal called one of the top 5 political books in 2021. He has about 18 jobs at the Political Forum: vice president, publisher, editor, analyst, maybe janitor. He's also the CEO and director of the Political Forum Institute. And I don't know if I can say this with a straight face, but he's had ice cream as a junior in high school with Andre the Giant. I still have so many questions about this. Was it at the medieval times? But he says it was the prelude to a lifelong friendship, which may have helped Steve find the 6-fingered man that killed his father. If you don't get that reference, stream The Princess Bride as soon as you get out of here. Last but not least is Scott Shepard, who intimidated the heck out of me when I went to his bio and the bottom line said, "For an archive of Scott's scholarly papers, click here." My idea of a scholarly paper is Us Weekly. He's the general counsel at the National Center for Public Policy Research, and he also serves as the director of the National Center's Free Enterprise Project, which is one of the first organizations that focused on the woke takeover of American corporate life. His fun but equally terrifying fact is that he was pulled aside and questioned by the Secret Service at a presidential debate. He assures me this was 1992, and we have nothing to worry about. Welcome to our panel. So we all sat down, well, sorry, Scott, I didn't know you then, but we sat down in Atlanta a couple years ago, long before Dylan Mulvaney's face was on a Bud Light can. And it felt like the landscape then was even subtly changing. Ron DeSantis had started taking on Disney, and it just sort of felt like there was a will on the part of the people to sort of stand up and fight. And I asked you then, and I went back and looked at the transcript, how did you feel about where things were headed? And Justin, you said, 13 years ago, we could have filled a room on ESG with me standing in a restroom yelling at myself in a mirror, which I would have personally loved to see. You insisted that it was the most optimistic you'd ever been. 2 years later, I mean, look at these headlines. I think there's a Vox headline coming up, but it says, American brands no longer care about being woke, which is, and the Vox isn't conservative. So what do you think now, all of you? You've been in this business.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone that's here. I was lonely for a very long time. I'm not lonely anymore.
No.
There are so many great Americans, so many great warriors that understand that ESG and DEI through corporate America is a threat to your everyday life. And you are now standing up and fighting back. You know, it was funny. During the pandemic, there was, all of these gas stations, there was these stickers that people would put towards the expensive gas with Biden's face on it saying, I did that. I like to say that for us to win the ESG battle, what we're going to have to do is replace Biden's face with Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock's face. When you understand that your gas prices are high, your grocery prices are high because Bidenomics is bad, don't get me wrong, but Larry Fink did that. That's when we'll win the battle.
Steve, you also said you were optimistic. You said when you started to write your book, you were pessimistic, but things were starting to change. 2 years later, how do you feel? Is it sustainable?
Is it sustainable? Yes, I think it is. Sustainability is a tough word for me to wrap my head around because that's the excuse that we get from most of corporate wokeness, for lack of a better term. They all want to make business sustainable, and what that means is they want to make it left-wing. I am optimistic. I think that there's been a lot of progress over the last 3.5 years. When my book came out, I did probably 100, 150 podcast and radio interviews. And I would have to explain at each and every interview what ESG was. It didn't matter who the host was, how famous they were, how prominent they were, how well they understood politics. Nobody knew what ESG was. Now everybody knows what ESG is. Now everybody knows what DEI is. Now everybody knows what the issues we're facing are. And so I think that's important. My job early in the movement was to drag Justin out of the bathroom where he was yelling at himself and raise awareness about this issue. And I think that that's one of the things that we've done remarkably successfully is raise awareness about what a small group of elites is doing to our corporate culture, doing to our capital markets, and thereby doing to our entire society.
Scott?
Well, as I come third, let me dampen our excitement just a bit. As a history nerd, I'll go all the way back to the beginning of the Republic. We have had a wonderful year or two, and I'd say that we've started the fight and we've won Lexington, maybe even conquered. But this is the very beginning of a battle that, to be successful, will have to go on for year after year after year. Not even Saratoga is glimmering in the distance yet. We've got a huge fight ahead of us, and we're going to have to fight because their goal, control energy, make it unreliable and more expensive, destroy the social fabric of the company by reintroducing racism, sexism, religious discrimination throughout American corporate culture. Right? What they want to do is destroy everything so that they can constrain our lives and they can live. I know this sounds conspiracy nut. It's absolutely true. So they can live from Davos as a world noble class controlling our lives. It's a horrifying combination of feudalism and, honestly, fascism that we face. And so we've had a good initial skirmish. We are on the field. We got to learn how to shoot.
Those were Civil War battles. Revolutionary.
Okay, Justin,
With the revolution.
I have a bit of a bone to pick with you, so we're going to settle it in front of all these people. But you have said you'd never thought back in the day that we could boycott our way out of this problem. So that personally crushed me. But so how do you feel now? And nobody's watching as you answer.
So, no, it's a great question, and Robbie Starbuck's doing great work in this space. And I would say my position still holds, and let me tell you why. So Reuters ran a headline last year that said, ESG, the year of retreat. I found that fascinating. Why? Because part of my day job is really dull and really boring, and it's reading every company's proxy statement so I can vote on them, right? I have to vote thousands of proxy statements every year. Last year, more companies in the S&P 500 tied the pay of their executives. There's a vote every year on every proxy. It's called Say on Pay. More companies in the S&P 500 than ever before tied executive pay to ESG and DEI. That's a really odd retreat. It hit 76%. So 76% of companies now pay their executives to hire people based on their skin color, their gender, and who they prefer to have sex with than ever before. That's a tough retreat. So what are your options? How are you going to boycott 76% of the S&P 500?
I'm trying.
You have two options, in my opinion, if you're going to do that. You could move to the woods, build your own shelter, make your own clothes, grow your own food. That's an option. People do it.
Hey, now we can ride motorcycles. We can drink Jack Daniels. We have a tractor with John Deere.
I wouldn't recommend drinking Jack Daniels and driving the Harley at the same time. But to each their own. I'm not going to police.
We can shop at Lowe's. Yeah.
So, but you get my point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, if you're going to boycott 76% of the S&P 500, you're not going to live a very interesting life. Like, first of all of you with an iPhone, throw it away. All of you with an Android, throw it away. Okay, does anybody have a phone? Can you call anyone? Like, sorry, like, I don't want to be like a Debbie Downer here, but like that is the reality. Let me give you what this looks like in real life. Like, one example. Boeing. Have they been in the headlines lately? Anybody seen anything going on with Boeing? They're doing pretty well. No. I mean, there's 2 astronauts that went up to the International Space Station on the Boeing Starliner. It was supposed to be 8 days. They're going to be there 8 months. This looks like this makes Gilligan's Island look like, a lunch tour. Okay? And so how do they pay their executives? What's wrong with corporate America? They pay their executives on 5 metrics, okay? 2 of them are product safety, quality and stability. 1 of them is employee safety, and then the last 2, DEI and sustainability. These are equally weighted metrics. This means Boeing cares as much about DEI and sustainability as they do about the safety of their airplanes that have wheels falling off and doors blowing out mid-flight. Okay? So how did they rate this last year? They had to admit that on stability, 16 out of 40. It's a 0 to 40 rating, 16 out of 40. In school, that's called an F. The other quality metric, 0 out of 40, F minus. But take heart. They got perfect 40 out of 40 on both sustainability and DEI. So the next time there's a problem with your Boeing plane, relax. They hired people based on what they look like, not their quality. Folks, diversity and inclusion are normative goods. I'm going to do my best Tucker voice here. Equity is what screwed everything up, which led to the death of meritocracy, which is creating corporate mediocrity. That's where we are now.
Okay, well, just to play the devil's advocate here.
Could I interrupt for just a second before we move
can.
on? It's important to understand that all of this, when Scott mentioned earlier that, we're talking about a combination of various things, including fascism, I would use the term corporatism to describe what's going on here, although the economics are pretty similar. If you go back and look at some of the headlines for Boeing in 1996, 1997, what you'll find is the Secretary of Commerce, Mickey Cantor, running around the world, particularly to China, to use the power of the United States federal government to push Boeing planes on the Chinese government, to try to compel the Chinese to buy Boeing planes instead of Airbus. There were only 2 primary manufacturers in the world of large passenger planes, and the United States government was integrating into the business model of the American, one of those 2 companies. And so the problems at Boeing predate any of, ESG or DEI or any of this. The problems at Boeing start with its inability to function on its own and its reliance on government and politics to make up the difference. And this dates back, as I say, 30 years.
Well, on the boycott front,
Don't let me down, Scott. You're new. Okay.
To continue the history nerd theme, wars are not won by evacuations. 10 points if you know who I'm quoting. Boycotts are fine, right? And I think they're the right thing to do if they're sustainable in all these other categories, but it's not enough. You've got to get in the fight. If you own shares, we put together an app, the Free Enterprise Project did recently, Proxy Navigator. You can go automate your proxy votes so that they're voted in the way you want, your values and our values. And then it's a very quick process, but you've got to, if you are getting a pension, you've got to make sure that pension is following fiduciary duty, not voting according to ESG, and sue them if they are. If you've got some kind of a client relationship with BlackRock or State Street or Vanguard, they're violating their fiduciary duties every time they speak at this point. They're the greatest confounders of solemn duty in the history of the business world. It's astonishing. So boycott if you wish, but stay in the fight.
I will say, I think this is a 3-pronged war. You have the consumers who are going to the store deciding what they buy based on what Robbie Starbucks posting. You also have the state legislatures and the comptrollers and the treasurers who are saying, we're divesting from BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. We've seen a lot of legislation over the past 2 years in particular where all the pension funds, teachers' pensions, retirement, et cetera, those people have divested, so that's good. But then we also have the shareholder activism. So I agree with you, but I do think everybody can do their part. And I will say what Robbie Starbuck has done, which I think is the most shocking in a way, is the retreat of the Human Rights Campaign. And this is something, Scott, that you've written about leading up to this, but just how much power they have over companies. And now you're seeing a remarkable number of CEOs saying, we're no longer submitting our scores. And they're just on the run, in my opinion. So do you think this is the beginning of the end of the Corporate Equality Index? What do you think this means for HRC and the LGBT activism we've seen in companies?
Well, for background, the Corporate Equality Index is a survey put out by HRC, the Human Rights Campaign, every year, that they pretend is just making sure that nobody's discriminating against anybody. What it is, to get a perfect score on this index, you have to affirmatively sign up your corporation for the left-wing position on some of the most toxic and extreme political concerns that trouble us, right? And so it's an admission by the people who get the 100% score of a breach of fiduciary duty every day in every way, right? And so we've been pushing for years, pointing out that they're admitting breach. Robbie Starbuck, who's wonderful, he has jumped into the fray, and with his support online, gotten the ball from the 10 into the end zone again and again and again. And preview, we might see some more of that from Robbie coming up, and it's wonderful, and it's a very necessary first step, and I'm glad of it.
If I may add, probably a month ago, when it first became clear that there were companies that were going to make the public changes that Robbie was encouraging without Robbie having to out them, that they were afraid that they would be outed and they'd just go ahead and make the changes anyway. Ford, I think, is the one that comes to mind most readily. I predicted that there's a possibility that we see a preference cascade here, where everybody begins to realize at the same time that everybody thought this oppressive regime was oppressive, but nobody wanted to say anything. And now that you see people saying things, the preferences are going to change, and we could see a major sweep. At the same time, Isaac Willauer, who is a new analyst at Boyer Research, had a long Twitter thread yesterday explaining that a lot of these companies that have publicly come out and disavowed their DEI policies because of the work that Robbie's done are nevertheless telling their employees privately that they're going to continue a lot of these policies. They're just going to take them out of their public-facing documents so that guys like Robbie can't expose them. So I think there's a possibility that we will have great success, but at the same time, we have to continue to push the ball forward on this, because corporations are not going to be as willing to change as we might hope.
And going back to Larry Fink, and has anyone ever had a more appropriate name, in my opinion? But so you're saying his pivot isn't genuine. You're saying that all these CEOs, they're just burying it deeper and deeper so that it doesn't come to light.
Yeah, so Larry Fink has publicly now said that he's no longer going to use the term ESG because somehow it's become toxic. I don't know, Larry, how did we get here? Like, are you kidding me? He made it toxic, and he rammed it down the throats of corporate America and down your throats. And so it's made my job actually much more difficult, Suzanne, because what I have to do is pierce through, is this a linguistic change, or has the company actually made a real substantial change in their action, right? So I look for action, not words. And what I find is a lot of companies are dropping ESG and just Control F, replacing it with sustainability or climate with, throughout their entire proxies, 10Ks, 8Ks, all of it, right? Well, then I go to their DEI report or their ESG report and see what they're really saying. You contact the employees, like what's actually happening on the ground. And what you see is there are some where there's actual change happening, and that's encouraging. But the vast majority are just hitting Control F and taking the toxic term, No, it's not toxic. We just defined it for everybody. And as Steve said, we showed it for what it was. And what it is evil. What it is stupidity. What it is grift. That's ESG. And once we exposed it for the truth, they have to change it to something else. And this happens all the time in politics and on the left. Once you expose it, they just swap the terms.
So what is someone like me to do? If they're hiding it, where do we look? What action do we take?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think that it starts with the day-to-day. I like to use Dubuque, Iowa as a great example because it's the only city in Iowa with 3 U's. So like whenever you're on Jeopardy, you can send me, $20 if you win for that. But do you think the Starbucks manager in Dubuque, Iowa agrees with the woke policies that come out of Seattle's headquarters? I don't think so. It starts with conversations like that. The Delta pilot, when you get on a plane, that doesn't agree to fund the Human Rights Campaign, but their headquarters does. Talk with the pilot, talk with the manager, talk with the stewardess, talk with the person at your Kroger checkout line. Those conversations are super important because those folks don't agree with what corporate is doing, but they have no political power unless you empower them. So you guys can empower the folks because, again, this is in many instances, a bottom-up situation. Because guess who feels empowered? The super woke employees. They go to their managers and they demand, fund that gay rights parade, fund the Human Rights Campaign. What are we doing on this issue, that issue? They're all the time in their managers' faces. But the folks that believe what you and I believe, they just go to work, collect an honest day's pay, go home, love their spouse, love their kids. Folks, that's important, but that's not enough. It's not going to win. Engage with the people that you see every day, and you'll empower them.
Absolutely. We are in Washington, D.C. This does have a political impact as well. I think in the last probably 10 years, we've really seen Republicans abandon big business, and there sort of be a handoff. In fact, I have a clip of something a Democratic presidential candidate said recently about the issue.
Stay woke. Like, everybody needs to be woke. And you can talk about if you're the wokest or woker, but just stay more woke than less woke.
How is that for a 2024 campaign slogan? But what do you make of this transit? I know, we should play that on repeat out in the streets. You're voting for this. But what do you make of this switch off, this handoff, that the Republican Party has sort of abandoned that and said, no, we care about the values, and the Democrats have embraced this extreme agenda?
So the thing to understand is that Republicans never should have been supportive of business in general. Republicans should be supportive of markets. Republicans should be supportive of shareholders. Republicans should be supportive of free enterprise. Big business has a tendency to consider big business before it considers anything else. And so you end up in a lot of cases with a collusionary relationship between big business and big government that doesn't serve anybody but big business and big government. And so the idea that Republicans should be supportive of big business is mistaken. Republicans need to be supportive of free markets and free enterprise and consumers, shareholders, workers, etc. Big business is not our friend.
Scott?
What Steve said is exactly right. When I mentioned fascism before, the original definition of fascism was the top of government and the top of business coming together to rule collectively, be the people with power and reduce the opportunities and liberties of the people of the country because they're just not particularly important. They're there as cannon fodder. They're there to represent the Volk or whatever. But they, as individuals, they are completely meaningless. Right? That's the same, that what these clowns have in mind for us is exactly the same thing. Consider that they say they're not partisan, but the whole of government initiatives of the Biden administration were equity-based discrimination and decarbonization on political schedules, no matter what it did to all of us. Those are the twin goals, primary goals of ESG. That's exactly what they want to do, and we have to fight it, recognizing that this country and no country can function without free markets. So we need to be in favor of free markets. We need to be in favor of property rights, and we are. But we're on the right side of this fight, unlike the confused, say, Romney types, right? Because the property holders here are the people who own shares through their pensions or they own them directly. They're the capitalists. These guys who want to shove their personal policy preferences down our throats are nothing but the managers for the owners, the shareholders. But they pretend to be the owners themselves. They steal the power of capital. What they're conducting is an insurrection against American capitalism, and we're protecting liberty and every part of the American way of life in every day of this struggle.
Yep. What Scott said's brilliant. And I'll just put a fine point on it, right? Jack Pacific has this expression, the point of a system is what it does, right? The point of a system is what it does. Well, ESG is just Marxism through corporate America, right? And the point of Marxism is to replace capitalism with communism. And if we go down this long route, where do we end up? We lift up totalitarian regimes. The CCP loves America's embrace of ESG. You can read headline after headline about that. Why? Because they'll win in the end. They'll be the sole superpower of the world, replacing us. We are going, if we go down the full route of ESG, we are going to lift up Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping. It's that simple. It's got to stop. And it stops with you.
So I asked you 2 years ago, I'm going to ask you before we leave. Are you hopeful?
I am.
My Debbie Downer.
Everything I said.
Yeah.
No, I'm very hopeful. I think that you guys are all awake to the woke. You guys have the tools. You have the knowledge. We just need to stay in the fight. Don't believe the headlines that ESG is in retreat. We've given you the data that it's not. But we can get it on the run and put it down if we do it together. So I am as optimistic as I've ever been, actually.
Wow. I'm going to play this back to myself. Stephen Scott, hopeful?
Yeah, I'm hopeful. I think...
Didn't sound like it.
My hope is tempered. I'll say that. The administrative state in this country has an awful lot of power, and they intend to use that power to push back against our pushback against ESG. Most of what I did in graduate school was study organizational theory and study bureaucracy. And one of the key points that Max Weber made about bureaucracy is that it's responsive. In the ideal type, it's supposed to be responsive to the political leaders, that it does essentially what the political leaders want. Weber was wrong. The bureaucracy has taken on a life of its own. The administrative state exists outside of and beyond politics. And so pushing the administrative state back down, into the bathtub where Grover Norquist wanted to drown government, push the administrative state into that bathtub as well, is going to be a lot of work. It's going to be multi-years, multi-generations. And that's what we ultimately have to do in order to win this fight. So yes, I am optimistic compared to where I was 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, but I know that there's a lot of work left to do.
When I was a little boy, one of my heroes before a convention quite like this one, as a matter of fact. Stood up and he said that the Soviet Union is a locus of evil in the modern world. And he was right, of course. Well, the Soviet Union's gone, and I know somebody else has the title of Father of Lies, but if your goal is to fight the Father of Lies here below, we know that he lives in Davos these days. That's the locus of evil in the modern Western world, and that's the power and the combination of power, the drawing in of power that we all have to fight.
Well, I'm hopeful. You didn't have to ask me, because you guys who have fought this fight, unappreciated, unrecognized for so long, are finally seeing the fruit of what you're doing. So we thank you all as a collective movement. Thank you to our panel.